There is no point in bringing people back to the office if everyone has headphones in. Are you asking complex questions on Slack? Are you pinging the person on Tuesday asking them for all these updates? Collective consciousness is something that really makes the workplace better for everybody. People may not mind coming into the office twice a week if they're actually getting some collaborative value out of it. All my work focuses around designing a socio-technical future, and there still is a physical world around us. Headphones should not be used in public communal spaces, thinking that a ping is always the way to fix things. How can we reduce this notification culture? Wow, I wasn't on my phone and my brain feels so different. People are really addicted to their phones. People immediately want to share everything that's happened to them. So how can we adjust some of those communication norms so that you can have that socio-technical balance in the workplace? There is inherent value in the human, or not just be stuck in the screen is so important to creating those fertile grounds for innovation. For us to get the most value out of technology, we need to take a step back and to realize that there is inherent value in the human, in the analog world, in the messiness and of direct and unmediated human connection. And coupling that with technological progress and value is the most important thing over the next 5 to 10 years.
So, for this conversation, a few short years ago, we probably would have been making direct eye contact. But today, I'm looking at you through a device. The choices we have around how we work and communicate are expanding faster than ever. In this episode, we explore how our analog and our mediated worlds are converging, and how, with the right design, that convergence can be optimized for deeper connection, productivity, and well being. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, where we dive into the seismic shifts, redefining how and where we work. From hybrid work and AI to workplace design, leadership, and culture, we're unpacking how the modern work environment is evolving. I'm Bob Fox, an architect and founder of Work Design, and for years I've been deep in the trenches of workplace design. Now, I'm excited to share inspiration from the brilliant minds who are transforming how and where we work. Each episode features forward-thinking leaders and experts who are reimagining the future of work, our work environments, the tools we use, and the human experience. So if you're shaping the future of work or just trying to make sense of it, we're glad you're here. Join us as we explore what is happening to the office. And we'd like for you to be a part of the conversation. So be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Today's guest is Caitlin Begg, a sociologist and founder of Authentic Social, an applied research lab at the intersection of sociology and technology. Caitlin's work explores how technology is reshaping communication, workplace culture, and human connection. She's spoken across the US and Europe on socio-technical design, AI, and the future of work. And she also hosts the Progression to Analog podcast, where she explores how we stay human in an increasingly digital world. Caitlin, welcome. We're very fortunate to have you join us.
Thanks so much for having me, Bob. Really excited to be here.
Good. Let's start if we can. I'd like for you to share a little bit about your background, maybe what you're working on and how you look at work and the work environment.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Authentic Social, which is an applied research lab at the intersection of sociology and technology. My work focuses on something called designing a socio-technical future, which in simpler terms is all about jointly optimizing people and technology for a better future. What that looks like is making sure that our work environments, our home environments, our everyday lives are optimizing for not only technology and the technological progress that we've seen change our lives over the past several decades, but also for the more human-centric parts of life.
I'm kind of curious. Do you look at it as technology is competing with the analog piece of it, or do they work together?
I think the common view of people is that technology can smooth and fix everything. It's this Silicon Valley idealism, this technocratic cybernetic imaginary that came about in the 90s and 2000s, although there's a longer history to it. And that idealism is very dangerous. Technology is a powerful tool, and I love technology. I'm a proponent of it, but when we over rely on it, it can really make a lot of our environments, especially the work environment, feel very impersonal, feel like we are just treating work as an input output and that there's less opportunity for creative or collaborative inputs.
I feel like we're in this period of time where the physical work environment and the digital work environment are converging. And, we're dealing with things like hybrid work, where some people are in the office, some people are out. So I'm curious, how do you balance those different types of interactions that we experience?
Yeah, so my work as it pertains to workplace design, and I've done some work with Miller Knoll and other clients, and I'm presenting some more research on this in Sweden in June at Stockholm University around the Science and Technology Conference in the Nordics on socio-technical design. And specifically, as we're looking at problems in the workplace, we want to focus first on the communication element of it, because as it pertains to hybrid work, you're constantly going back and forth between in-person environments and digital environments. And what's at the core of that, or what's linking that, is communication. And so often communication is thought of as a byproduct or as something that's not very important, but it really is at the core of everything that we do. So what my work focuses on is these four principles of socio-technical design. I've redone and updated some of the principles that were first written in the 1970s. But at the first principle is looking at this everyday conversation in the workplace and figuring out what are our communication norms. Are we using asynchronous communication for too many things? Because it should just be used for an exchange of information, and synchronous dialogue should be used for ideation, creation, connection. That simple piece and changing that in the workplace can make hybrid work a lot more enjoyable and productive for employees and for executives.
How about the role of data in understanding what works best for different types of organizations? So is there a way that we should be looking at that?
Yeah, so a lot of organizations over rely on quantitative data for the understanding their workplace. And so they have a lot of different softwares. Sometimes companies use monitoring tools. Something that's centers in my work is making sure that the workplace is set up for understanding and having a robust qualitative data engine and understanding more about your people. And I specialize in an area of sociology called ethnomethodology, which takes a look at our everyday lives and our everyday conversation, how that shapes the world and the workplace specifically. So for companies, what's important to understand is not just on a macro level what type of data you're getting, or for example, if you're looking at a sales team and they're hybrid, how many emails they're sending or what the response rate is, but how are your employees structuring their everyday, whether it's in person or remote? Are they doing it in a way that is optimized for the workplace, or are they doing it in a way that's really haphazard? So understanding from a data perspective, how are your employees spending their days? Are there areas where they feel like we're using too many tools and we're bogged down in asynchronous communication from 4 hours to 6 hours a day? Adobe and Loom have done research that shows that anywhere from 3.5 to 6 hours a day can sometimes make up this asynchronous communication and email and Slack. If that's 40 to 60% of our average 8-hour workday, how are we supposed to find time to ideate, create, and connect? So taking some time to figure out what are the processes like, how are people spending their everyday, and how can we tweak that to get to the outcomes that we might want? That's an important piece of being a data-driven organization. And as it applies to AI, as many of us know, AI is only good as the data and the inputs that we have. So you can't just expect AI to be this magical quick fix for organizations. You really need to take a socio-technical approach to it, jointly optimize people and technology, figure out what does your organization need, what is one thing that we could work on and that AI might be able to help us with, and what data inputs do we have, what data inputs do we need.
So you got me thinking, traditionally, the water cooler has been, the valued place to have casual, interactive kinds of conversations. And I'm wondering how the mediated world has warped that view of the water cooler conversation.
Yeah, so I have a term for water cooler conversations, actually. I refer to them as micro conversations. And there are these casual happenstance conversations that happen and that are unplanned and can become very important parts of our relationships with our colleagues and the way that we can structure moving forward. So, for example, if you're in a meeting and you really disagree with what's being discussed, when you're on Zoom, you shut it down and you move on to your next task. You might have to put in some laundry or you might have to meet with another colleague on Zoom. But if you're in a physical space and something's going wrong in that meeting, you might be next to your colleague, Andreas, and say, "Hey, Andreas, I'm not really sure about that. Are you? What do you think about this?" And he might say, "I wasn't sure about that either." And then that starts to gather some insights so that you can make better decisions. One of the things that's really important when you're setting up hybrid remote work is understanding, are there spaces for colleagues for people to have casual conversations, or is everything kind of done in the spectacular, done in the pre-scheduled? How can we make sure that there are opportunities for more casual conversations? In my personal and professional view, this for most teams, unless you're fully remote and we're designed that way, this does involve a level of in-person interaction because you're not able to do all work remote, especially when it's creative and collaborative.
I'm just thinking, are there things that organizations can do to facilitate more organic types of conversations?
It starts with understanding your people and understanding what they want and understanding what where the delta is between where they are now and where they'd like to go. Because understanding your people will help make sure that if you are transitioning them back to an office environment, that you're not going from fully remote to 5 days in the office and expecting there to be this magic wand that you can wave where everyone especially wants to talk to each other. Sometimes I'm brought into workplace design engagements because companies will say to me, "We brought everyone back to the office, but no one's talking to each other." And I will do an analysis through this socio-technical design and figure out, well, part of the reason is because of an over reliance on smartphones and notification culture within the workplace. So I do some sociological studies on smartphone use and how that everyday smartphone use affects our work life and our personal life. But something that I've noticed when we're transitioning back into in person is that if the company has a culture where it's a notification culture, so Slack, accelerated communication, people might be in person and in the same physical space, but they're constantly checking their notifications. They might be at lunch with someone answering different emails and answering different things and not fully present. So how can we adjust some of those communication norms while understanding that sometimes there are workplace emergencies that need to be attended to, but if everything's an emergency, then nothing's an emergency. So how can we restructure that communication so that when we are in person, we're getting the most value out of it? But then people may not mind coming into the office twice a week if they're actually getting some collaborative value out of it versus coming into the office and just sitting on a Zoom all day or sitting next to someone at lunch who's answering to all different texts to friends and answering different texts to different clients or prospects and not really paying attention.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you have any suggestions? Because I think that's a common problem where you're either in meetings or you're working with somebody and, the phone's a constant distraction. Are there policies that organizations need to implement, or are there guidelines that you would suggest to try to improve those personal interactions?
Yeah, so this is part of what Authentic Social does. So we'll go in for a quarter and help fix this. But for your organization, if you want to look at how to do this yourself or how to begin this process, is first looking at how are you using asynchronous communication and how are you using synchronous communication? What is the norm within your organization when you have a piece of information? Are you asking complex questions on Slack? So, for example, if you have a meeting scheduled on Wednesday, are you pinging the person on Tuesday asking them for all these updates? Well, then when you get to the meeting, you're just going to be on Slack looking at the next thing. So you first need to figure out what are our norms for asynchronous communication, what are our norms for synchronous communication, and then those norms need to be followed by everybody, and that includes the executives. I have sometimes the most difficulty with the executive level of people following those and thinking that a ping is always the way to fix things. And I spoke about this at Brain Bar, Europe's largest festival in the future, about how dangerous notification culture can be for making decisions and really understanding where we are. Say that you're in a pitch and you're trying to close a big deal with a prospective client and you get a ping from your boss saying, "Hey, I need this right now," where you're going to interrupt your pitch to give them that information. And then the prospect might feel like they're not being attended to and they might move on to another person. So it does have, and we've seen this in data before. This isn't just anecdotal, is that this having an adjustment of norms is really important. So really first that synchronous versus asynchronous communication, how are we using it? And then second, figuring out where do we want to be? What are some creative outputs or things that we want to get to? Say that, okay, we want to have 5 more of these different outputs within the next quarter with these 4 teams. Well, how can we make sure that there's more time reserved in person for these people to get together and to actually be able to ideate, create, connect, and not just have a 30-minute Zoom that's a repeating of an email, repeating of pings. Because that's often what happens is the meetings that we're having end up being repeats of pings or repeats of emails that we've already had, where the meetings actually should be used for different things.
We talked earlier about the use of headphones, and I think
Yes.
in the open office, it can both be a blessing and a curse. So I'm curious how headphones play into our communication and the way that we work.
Yes. So I am currently doing a study called Stuck in the Screen that is looking at our everyday smartphone use. And I started this study in January on New Year's Day. And I don't wear headphones in public except for when I am working out sometimes and when I'm in the air on a flight. And what that has, and I track all instances of public smartphone noise. And what this has done is I was inspired in part by this French sociologist, Henri Lefebvre, who in the 1940s said that we're becoming more atomized individuals because of technology and because of capitalism. And I found that to be so interesting because when I'm on the subway and I'm tracking this data over the past few months, I really do notice that we do act as atomized individuals. And sometimes that's a good thing. That means that people are minding their own business and they're not bothering people. I mean, on almost 150 rides this year, I've only felt slightly unsafe on one of those rides. And so it is largely a safe environment. I don't see a lot of people bothering each other. So from that perspective, being an atomized individual, okay, great. But when we look at the instances of public smartphone noise, and at this point in my research, over 70% of rides have loud public smartphone noise. That's not a great indicator for how people are interacting with their phones on an everyday basis. And how that extends back to the workplace is that people are really addicted to their phones. They begin their day on their phone, they're spending all day on their phone. I, since the 5th of September 2022, have begun each morning without exception reading nonfiction before any phone or computer use. And this has decreased my screen time by over 65%, but also really helped to adjust the way that I think about phones and impacted how I've looked at this in the workplace. But some of the times when I'm working with companies and trying to figure out how can we reduce this notification culture, how can we adjust this, if all your employees are really addicted to their phones and really addicted to headphones and being an atomized individual, that's not a great way to shape culture. And so headphones are something that should be used when someone is basically it's a visual cue of do not disturb. So there would be appropriate uses in the workplace for that for when you are trying to do deep work. So if you're at your desk, and especially as someone who's neurodivergent, I have ADHD. When I was at LinkedIn in the office, I would have headphones in when I was doing deep work. I didn't want to be disturbed. Maybe I'd have in classical music. Headphones should not be used in public communal spaces where you can have these micro conversations or these run-ins, because there is no point in bringing people back to the office if everyone has headphones in constantly. That doesn't really create a communal environment. So that's where norms, because you don't also want to have a fully no headphones policy, because that's quite frankly not accommodating to people with ADHD or autistic people who might have different needs, or even neurotypical people who like to work with headphones in. But also, there should be norms of when you might be able to go up to a colleague who has headphones in when they're deep working, or making sure that in communal spaces, it's not just these atomized individuals all around, that there is a sense of collectivity.
One of the other things I'm sort of fascinated with is it used to be that we were either in meetings or maybe on the phone. And now there are so many more options that we have for how we communicate and interact with people. And I know you've studied some of that. So I'm curious, the different channels that we have, is there a way to choose one over the other, or how do we manage that?
Yeah, in my research, I found that there are 7 times the amount of conversation channels on an everyday basis as compared to just a couple decades ago. And we still have the same amount of time. So, this 7 times the amount of communication channels can really bifurcate communication. And if we're trying to get to a deeper level with people, having all these spread out communication channels makes it very confusing to engage in deeper conversations. So, what I like to think about is make sure that you have one channel that you're using for each each conversation or with each person. So, for example, if you've started a conversation with someone about topic A on email, don't then bifurcate that conversation and send them something about that topic on LinkedIn. Continue the conversation where it was begun, because it's not only important when you're having the conversation, but it makes things really difficult when you're trying to go back and find information for a meeting when when you're spreading things all across different channels. So that's why pings and Slack should be used for, hi, can you send me X file if you need something quickly, if there's an immediacy element to it. But if there's something that's longer and more drawn out that you may need to refer back to, you should use email for that. So that's something that I like to consider. And also, even when we're looking at our communication with friends, because our everyday communication, our personal communication really flows into our workplace communication. I've seen this in my work before, is that if people are hyper communicators in their personal lives, they tend to be hyper communicators in their professional lives. And what I mean by hyper communicators is it's this notion of hyper communication or excess inbound or outbound communication precipitated by technology. So This is all well and good on an individual level, but there also needs to be norms from the executives to say, hey, we really want email to be used for XYZ, and we would like Slack to be used for ABC. Following those norms may be difficult, but it's important to catch that. And one of the ways that we've found success in that is as companies are trying to adjust to these norms, if they get a message on Slack about something, actually someone taking it to email and correcting it and doing that corrective behavior. Because it's like if you are a rower and you have really poor form, well, you want to fix that form. And before it gets too late, you want to fix this poor form so that communication can get better, because you don't want to be spread out and spread out thin over 7 different communication channels. The other thing that I've seen to work is having customized do not disturbs on your smartphones. So obviously, we're not able to always have our phone on full do not disturb because we might have to answer calls from certain people. But you can block certain apps from notifications. You can block certain things. You can block calls from everyone except for a select group of people. You can really select what your notifications are so that you're not getting ping, 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 ping interruptions during the day. So that's another important piece of it.
I'm curious, do you find that all this technology is changing us as humans and the way that we interact?
Definitely. What I find a lot is that people immediately want to share everything that's happened to them. And a funny anecdotal example I can use of this that is with personal life, but also can apply to professional life is, say that you have a lot of different exciting things that have happened to you. And every time an exciting thing happens, you text your friends what happened. Then you have brunch on Sunday and you see them, and well, you've already told them everything that's exciting. And so everyone then goes on their phones. Whereas if you had saved that information, I mean, I just saw friends on Friday and we had made a list of all the fun things to catch up on, and it was so much more fun to do in person. But the same can be said to meetings, is that that's why people end up going on their phones during meetings or going on Slack during meetings, because they've already talked about everything ahead of the meeting. If you really want to use the meeting time to talk about something, then wait to talk about it during the meantime, because then the conversation can flow more naturally.
I think AI now is something that's really infiltrating the work environment as a tool. And I'm curious how you see that impacting the way that we communicate and interact.
Yeah, so there's an interesting finding from Microsoft and LinkedIn's annual workforce report that found that 78% of people are doing something called BYO AI, or bringing their own AI to work, regardless of whether the employer knows about it. So this is an important thing to understand as employers and as employees, because whether we like it or not, people are using AI in their everyday life and in their work. So what's important as employers and as companies in looking for organizational change, and I spoke about this at World Summit AI in Amsterdam in October, is about a socio-technical approach to AI. How can we jointly optimize people and technology for artificial intelligence adoption? What that looks like in practice is not over relying on AI to fix, solve, and smooth everything. Think of AI as an assistant that if you hired a consultant or an executive assistant to help you, on day one or on minute one, they're not going to be able to do everything. They need to learn from you, they need to understand you, and you still need to do certain things. So there's a symbiotic relationship that needs to happen there, and understanding what data we're inputting, what opportunities we're trying to solve for or improve. That's also important. Is if you're trying to reduce the amount of repetitive tasks that you have on an everyday basis, okay, that's one thing. But trying to do everything at once is the biggest mistake that I see people dealing with in the workplace with artificial intelligence, thinking that they can just write every memo and shortcut things and do everything, when that's really not the case. And also from a differentiating standpoint, if you're trying to optimize for a certain topic and you're putting inputs into AI and not really writing something first and then using it to tweak, well, then it's just going to be the same as all of your competitors.
Now, and I think that's something that organizations are struggling with. How do they sort of, I'll say, standardize that practice so that there's consistency across the organization?
Yeah. So one thing I like to think about, and this is again something I mentioned at World Summit AI in Amsterdam, is something called situated learning. So it's about making sure that there's learning on an everyday basis in a practical setting, and not just bringing in someone who does one talk and then that's it. Making sure that, okay, on an everyday basis, your employees should be understanding how they should be leveraging AI. So maybe that's 10-minute learnings that they're supposed to do each day, or 10-minute check-ins, or 10-minute conversations. Making sure that there's learning on an everyday basis so that you can get to the end of the quarter and get to those checkpoints. That's really important, because what doesn't work is saying to a group of employees in January, hey, we want you to be doing X with AI by April, but you're not really checking in, or you're only checking in once a month. People really go in very different directions when they're using tools like ChatGPT for work. And you want to make sure for the organization, if you are trying to go in a certain direction for a creative project or for your fiscal year or whatever it might be, that your employees are doing the same. So figuring out and saying to them, here's how we might want to use it for as it pertains to marketing materials. Here are some do's and here are some do nots. Let's have you test this case, and after a week, report back to us what worked and what didn't work. And then we can tweak different things. But having those intermediate learnings and those intermediate tweaks are really important so that you can understand, because from an executive level, you might think that your best case for GPT or for different tools like Gemini might be, a certain way, but your employees might be using it differently. So understanding what they're really doing is a key part of this. And this socio-technical approach of how can we free up some time maybe in the everyday so that people can use that time to ideate, create, connect, come up with these moonshot ideas or these new imaginative things so that they don't have to be spending tons of time on this administrative work.
I think a lot of our organizations depend on our ability to innovate. And I'm just thinking about how do these tools help to facilitate that, or are they actually hindering us in our ability to do that?
I think it's all about prompt engineering, and that's why people really should think about the most important skill in the next several decades for everyone to learn is prompt engineering. Because if you don't understand how to really interact with AI on an everyday basis for a problem, you're going to fall further and further behind over the next several years. And what I mean by that is if you want to say that you are writing a brief on topic A and you want some help with AI, well, you should write that brief on your own without the assistance of AI. And then if you want help with, okay, is this is what the client's statement of work was. This is what my brief is. You upload both documents and you say, hey, what are some things that I'm missing in between what the client wanted and what I wrote? That's a great prompt. And then it'll give you some things. And then you can say, well, okay, here's the client. Here's some background information on them. Here's, I might want to tweak this. And this is what our meeting is. And this is who I'm meeting with. That's a great prompt versus having the statement of work from the client and just putting that in and saying, write me the brief, write me the output. So see the difference there is that most people do the second thing right now is they're using it and they're trying to get AI to have to be the starting point to write them the beginning part and then they tweak that when it should be the opposite. So it can help optimize your existing work, but what I don't see it being the best at this point is create the output completely. Now that varies completely based on your area of work, but that's something to consider. And also, you can do it in intermediate things. So if you have a big project, you could break it up into different parts and write your thoughts on it and get little inputs on each of those parts. But prompt engineering can really be thought of just as being a conversationalist with AI. ChatGPT and other similar tools have voice recording tools where you can actually talk to it like you're talking on the phone and get some input in that way. But really playing around with it and spending time with these tools is the best way to understand how it might work for you.
I'd like to dive a little bit into progression to analog and how you're using that. I get the sense it's about helping to mitigate the overwhelming aspects of the technologies that we interact with.
Yes, and progression to analog, that term is trying to help reframe the way that we think about analog life and direct unmediated experience, and that it can be progress, that analog does not always have to be thought of as something that's backwards. I have this phone from eBay that works that's at my desk that I use in addition to my cell phone. So it's not one or the other. What I want to do is help people understand this period that we live in, technological modernity, and with so much acceleration and change, and understand different topics around it. We talk about everything from the sociology of blocking to different ways to approach socio-technical AI. I just interviewed some interesting teenagers in Brooklyn who have a completely analog view of life. And there's just really some interesting pieces around how we can reframe what we think of as progress.
I'm also aware that you start every day reading,
Yes,
so that it's not like you pick up your phone and you're really immersed in this digital world.
precisely. So, yeah, since the 5th of September, 2022, I've begun each morning without exception reading nonfiction before any phone or computer use. And this has really changed my life in a lot of different ways. It started by accident, actually. I was in Maine and it was Labor Day weekend in 2022, and my phone was across the room and was dead. And so I woke up that morning, and my book, Society of the Spectacle, happened to be next to me. It had taken me several months to read the first 50%. And that morning, I sat in the little reading nook in the house in Maine, and in a couple hours finished the second 50% of the book. And my brain felt so different. And I'd continued that day, and I got almost halfway through the day, and I realized, wow, I wasn't on my phone, and brain feels so different. And so that's where I started to use the term phone brain, because I do notice these differences in our brains when we are on our phones in the morning when we're not. Turns out I'm not crazy. So there's an episode of Progression to Analog called No Phones in the Bedroom question mark. And it's a great entry point for anyone who's looking into why smartphones are not great in the morning. And one of the things that I speak about there is there's this sleep inertia and sleep drunkenness that happens in the morning. So it's in this state where we're awake, but we're not fully awake. And our brains are very impressionable to what happens in those few minutes or first hour. But if we roll over and immediately start scrolling Snapchat news or get all these crazy headlines and do things like that, it really depletes our brain to be able to create and communicate on an everyday basis. And we end up having higher screen times. We end up being more distracted. So, one tip or takeaway, if you're looking to be more productive in your work life, if you feel like you're distracted, if you feel like your employees are distracted, this is something that I've actually done as a group exercise with people in organizations is say, let's explore our smartphone use and let's try as a team to begin each morning with direct unmediated experience. Now, I know that this is not an easy thing for everyone. Sometimes there are parents who are busy. Sometimes there are people who have to be on the phone in the morning for work or whatever that might be. But for me, sometimes it's an hour of reading. Sometimes it's 2 minutes and it's a page, whatever that might be. And for you, if you're not a big reader, you could look out the window for 10 minutes. You could do 20 jumping jacks. Anything that's direct and unmediated, that is what is the key in beginning our everyday.
A lot of our audience is designing workplaces. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, given the interactions that we have both with people and technology, is there anything that you would suggest to help organizations improve the dialogue among the people?
I think also going back to one of my points earlier about how work has become more input output oriented with technology is making sure that there's time carved out for the employees to get to know each other on the team, especially if you're working remotely. It happens a lot where people don't really know each other. And that is very important to understand each other, to understand communication norms, to understand what excites everyone, what is holding people back. And so spending time together is an important piece of that. If you're a hybrid workplace that only sees each other, say, once a quarter, have some check-ins each quarter to make sure that people are getting to know each other. Encourage that everyday conversation. If you're a team of, say, business development representatives who are early in career and are trying to share knowledge, have some informal knowledge sharing things on the calendar for them. Make sure that there's not everything is a meeting where you have to report something, that sometimes it can just be casual, free flowing dialogue. That is just as important as meetings and as these check-ins.
Is there a special space where that happens, or do you think that that just happens within the office itself?
One of the ways that we can design spaces is to make sure that there are spaces for casual run-ins and for these micro conversations, and that people are encouraged to use these spaces, because a lot of times these spaces exist, but people are not using them. So that's where modeling the behavior is important. If you're an executive and you want to speak to more of your employees and more of your team members, and you just designed a space where you want people to talk to each other, well, for 30 minutes a day, if you can, or even if it's 15 minutes or in between things, sit down at those spaces and be open and don't have your headphones in. It's about modeling that behavior, because people really do like to mirror behavior that they see. So have a leader on each team start to spend time in those spaces, and then the interactions will start to flow. But it is important when you're designing the workplace to make sure that those spaces exist, to make sure that people, the location of those spaces are important, or that there's comfortable spots for people to be sitting, that there's a good balance of places where people can do deep work and kind of be on their own, so that atomized individual, but also be collective contributors and be able to find each other and encounter each other. One of the things that technology has done is it's made us a little bit more hesitant to have that initial conversation and to approach people. And that's where it's important to just take the leap and to make conversation with a colleague that you see, or to cross pollinate with other teams, and to make sure that there are spaces where that may happen. And that's where it's important when organizations are going back to the office to make sure that everyone is not on Zooms 24/7 on those days when they're in the office. Now, it may happen that after a quarter, you may have to have some of those time be more virtual meetings, but especially in the first couple weeks, make sure that maybe things are scheduled tightly so that in the 2 days when people are home, that's when they have more of their Zooms. And in person, there are some times for people to interact in those spaces. And also, when you're returning to the office, have big meetings in those spaces. Show people how to use them. Show people how to use the spaces or what you're supposed to be doing. It's kind of like at the gym when there are complicated machines and people don't know how to use them. But then if you see someone using that machine, you think, oh, I could do that. I'll just go over and do that. And because I was a college athlete and I was a rower, I know how to use these machines. I know how to lift in the machines, but I've had friends say to me before, "Oh, I went to the gym with you and now I know I understand how to use that machine." It's the same with the workplace. If you see someone, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize that cool chair in the corner, you could sit there." That's normal. It's okay to like in the middle of the workday, maybe just go there and read for 15 minutes and reset. And it's also about framing what is work and what's important because if we're thinking about work only as being by a computer, then people aren't going to have those happenstance interactions. A lot of work can happen by a notebook and thinking, or some work can happen for reading in the middle of the day and resetting your brain and trying to get some more ideas or some more reading. So figuring out, making sure that the norms and the signals that people are giving to people as they're walking around match with the company culture and norms. So because if an executive wants someone to be on their phone all the time and checking things, then they're going to show and virtue signal to their boss, "Oh, look, see, I'm on my phone. I'm checking things, even as I'm in line for lunch." We don't want that because then that's counterintuitive for people actually interact.
So let me ask you, if you look out into the future over the next 5, maybe 10 years, how do you see things evolving? How does this technology and how do the ways that we interact as humans change?
All my work focuses around designing a socio-technical future and this joint optimization between people and technology because that's what I believe the future is. I believe that in order for us to get the most value out of technology, we need to take a step back and to realize that there is inherent value in the human, in the analog world, in the messiness and of direct and unmediated human connection. And coupling that with technological progress and value is the most important thing over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm not blind to this. I know that there are organizations that exist and will continue to exist that don't care about that, that are more technological progress at the cost of anything. But as a workplace, if you want to retain your people, if you want to create a great environment for them, a lot of research is showing that having this socio-technical approach to the workplace and making sure that you're understanding their needs in tandem with the technological needs and not just stamping technology on top of them and forcing technological tools down their throats, that's what's important about moving forward. My research was featured in a Harvard Business Review press book, Jennifer Moss's Why Are We Here, around some of this research and communication. And it's really important to understand what communication processes and what processes are going on so that you can have that socio-technical balance in the workplace. I think all these conversations about AI are scary and we don't know when AGI is going to be or how our everyday lives are going to shift. But what we can control is what are the norms within our organization? How are we keeping the human pulse of our organization with AI? Because AI is not going to solve and fix and smooth everything. I mean, if we look at the cybernetic idealism that was happening in the 90s and 2000s, if all this were true, then we wouldn't have had the dot-com bubble burst. I mean, we would just be in this endless period of growth that we thought, around Y2K was going to be there. It's not. Technology is something that has to work in tandem with people, and something that I've been most amazed at in my work is sometimes how little Americans understand that. And one of my real goals with my career is to show that this socio-technical approach to the workplace not only is good for people and makes us feel good and fuzzy, but it actually is great for profit incentives and for profit-driven outcomes. Linking research and linking all this workplace research to profit-driven outcomes and making sure there's this joint optimization between people and technology actually originated in the post-World War II era, trying to make sure that all these technological advancements worked in tandem with people. There is actually military and operational background to this. And so I'm trying to bring all this to the forefront and have some innovations here because I really believe that this is the future. And a lot of my work ends up being in the Netherlands. I have a office there as well and in Sweden because these people there really understand inherently the value of socio-technical design. And I believe that if Americans began to understand this value, that they'd really unlock a lot of human potential.
We've covered a pretty broad range of topics. I'm wondering if there's anything that we left out that would be important to include in the conversation.
No, I think we've covered a lot here. And I think something important to think about is that a lot of these topics seem bigger than life. It's like, wow, AI is here and it's changing everything. Workplace, all this is great, but now I have to go back to work and I have a million emails to answer. How can I have a simple change in my life? This no phones in the bedroom piece, if there's any takeaway from this, start with your individual life and talk to your manager, talk to your boss about how notification culture is affecting your workplace. I mean, I've spoken to so many people, and I'm now working on a big study, interviewing thousands of people on this about how much this affects our everyday life. And if you can impact your smartphone use, and maybe sometimes when you're outside, take the 10 to 15-minute breaks that you have on work and don't have your headphones in and just look around you and breathe and be where you are, you can start to impact some of the downstream processes that go on in life, and really start to think about some ways in your life that you can balance technological progress with ideation, creation, connection, and what we can do to make our everyday lives and workplaces better.
I'm thinking that just even looking up and appreciating the environment that you're in, appreciating nature, the people that you're surrounded by.
Yeah.
We have our heads in our phones for such a big
Yeah.
chunk of the day. We have to understand that there's another world that exists.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this French revolutionary group, the Situationists from 1957 to 1972, that came up with this term called the dérive, which is an unplanned encounter or walk, or really directly in French means drifting through an urban landscape. One thing that you can do just even today is go on a derive. Don't go on a walk always and say, I'm going to go for 2.22 miles and I'm going to have my headphones in the whole time. Even if you're doing that, take a 5 minute break in the middle of it and take your headphones out and be like, wow, I'm here. Or drift and don't have a planned outcome for everywhere that you're going. Time and this, what work does to us every day is when we have everything so scheduled and we're constantly looking at the clock, we're not losing ourselves in our everyday life and able to have those creative or deeper ideation, creation, connection. That's a lot easier said than done. Capitalism and work makes things complicated, but we can find pockets of still in our week, whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's 15 minutes, to ground ourselves in the fact that there still is a physical world around us. It's not just this digital world. And that can really impact not only our personal life, but our work life. And one of the biggest things that I think about is that work and life are very intertwined. And this is the reality that we live in. Is capitalism's the system that we're in. So how can we make it as good as possible for everybody? How can we make it equitable? Because collective consciousness is something that really makes the workplace better for everybody. When we have collective organizing within workplaces and employees feel like they have a voice, they want to stay. And then that saves companies money. I mean, when people leave, it costs companies a lot of money to replace them. Think about if you're an executive, it's not just, again, something that sounds great and sounds woo woo, be nice to your employees or optimize for people in technology. It's something that can help you future proof yourself, because there's going to be a lot of changes over the next several decades. And if you're constantly having to replace people and constantly having to change your strategy, that's going to be really difficult. Make people want to stay within your organization and balance people and technology.
Well, you touched on something there that I think the workplace is kind of struggling with right now because a lot of the improvements that we see are because we iterate things.
Yes,
And those iterations come through multiple ideas that people put into
exactly.
some concept that they're working on. But I find that that's probably happening less and less now.
Yes, and we're expected to go from idea to execution like that. So you hit the nail on the head there. Is this process of ideation and creation of this connection, it's lost its value a lot because we just have pre-scheduled things. Okay, we have a meeting today to talk about this, and in 1 week we're expected to have this output. Output, 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 output. How can we make sure that there is a little bit more of a dance of back and forth of how can we get to where we need to be? Or if there are some parts of the workplace that the input output thing is helpful and more efficient, how can we make that process more efficient, reduce the time that we're spending on those things, and then maybe have some more time to do the more ideation, creation, connection piece? Because that is very important. Is you can't get from a seed to a big plant in 2 minutes, but technology has made us think that we can, because now AI can generate images of anything in 2 seconds, and it's lost that value of the slowness and the friction of things not accelerating and things being a little bit slower. And I'd caution leaders to think about, when you think about the greatest innovations of the next several decades, it's not going to be accelerating every part of your everyday so that your employees are getting quick outputs on AI all the time. It's about how can we take our existing human capital and all these ideas and organizations and really up level it and really get it to the next level. That's going to take some ideation. It's going to take some back and forth. It's going to take some tweaking. And it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because it's one of the biggest problems I've seen with some organizations that I work with, is that they want a solution. They come up with the problem today and they want a solution tomorrow. And sometimes that's possible, but for some bigger issues, you're going to have a back and forth on things. You're going to have to be willing to take intelligent risks, and something I work on with Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business School, an amazing professor who coins psychological safety. We're working now on some things about how intelligent failures in the workplace, how socio-technical design can help reduce complex failures in the workplace, because it's important to understand that are when we are optimizing for just technological progress, we're not really allowing people to experiment and to have potential intelligent failures. We want everything to be perfect on the first try, which means that, yeah, maybe we're making slight progress. We're not having those moonshot big wins because we're not allowing people to make mistakes and fail intelligently.
Well, I feel like the pandemic gave us an opportunity to rethink our work environments. And I feel like we've had this opportunity, but nobody's really come up with anything that's all that different.
Yeah.
We basically separated people. And now I think it's the human-centric environments that are so important, where we have the opportunity to exchange ideas and get to know people and understand how we as humans survive.
Yeah, exactly. It's about what on an everyday basis can help to change our everyday work life and balance. And I've been very inspired. Brian Eno has these cards that I have on my desk that have some inspirational pieces that's called oblique strategies. And there's these interesting prompts and things. And actually something I've been working on is a workplace design card set, because I think sometimes when people are at their desk by themselves, they're looking for prompts of where can I get started? Where can I move? How can I get to that next step? And sometimes just getting ourselves out of our routine environment is really important, and figuring out how can I have some change in my everyday life. That's a very important thing. And as employers, to really make it an imperative for your employees to be changing their environment and going to see new things or places, or not just be stuck in the screen, is so important to creating those fertile grounds for innovation and for these moonshot ideas.
It's been great having the conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bob. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and the stories and ideas that you're amplifying.